240 million computers, working computers, machines that booted up this morning, ran your documents, played your videos, handled your email, told they were dead, not by a virus, not by a hardware failure, by a policy decision from a trillion-dollar corporation that decided your perfectly functional machine was no longer good enough for its ecosystem. And right now, a free Linux distribution is doing what Microsoft refused to do. It is picking those computers back up. And the deeper you look into what Microsoft offered those users versus what Linux Mint offers them, the more uncomfortable the comparison gets. Let's start with the number, because the number matters. Analyst firm Canalys estimated that approximately 240 million PCs, roughly 1/5 of the entire Windows 10 installed base, could not upgrade to Windows 11. Not because those machines were broken, not because they were too slow to be useful, because they lacked specific hardware that Microsoft decided was mandatory. TPM2, UEFI Secure Boot, supported CPU generations. Windows 11 requires all of it. And machines running Intel 6th and 7th generation processors, the kind that shipped in millions of laptops bought between 2015 and 2018, cannot upgrade regardless of whether they have the security chip or not. Dell confirmed this in their own support documentation. You could have TPM2 enabled and still be locked out. The wall was bigger than most users realized. Canalys put the environmental consequence into terms that should embarrass everyone involved. If all of those abandoned laptops were stacked on top of each other, the pile would stand 600 kilometers taller than the moon. That is not a software problem. That is an industrial waste event tied directly to a product strategy decision. 240 million working computers, one policy. That is not progress. That is waste. And that is before we even get to what Microsoft offered those 240 million users as a solution. Because this is where things get ugly. Microsoft's official answer was a program called Extended Security Updates. For consumers, the deal was $30, 1 year. Security patches only, no new features, no improvements, no technical support included. And when that year ends in October 2026, the consumer program stops entirely. There is no year 2 option for home users. You pay, you get 1 year, and then you are back to exactly the same problem you started with. Except now you are also a year older on hardware that still cannot run Windows 11. It gets worse for businesses. Enterprise ESU pricing starts at $61 per device for year 1. Year 2 doubles to $122 per device. Year 3 doubles again to $244 per device. And the program is cumulative. If you are late enrolling, you pay retroactively for the years you missed. A company running 100 older PCs that waits too long could face over $24,000 in patch fees over 3 years for an operating system that is receiving 0 new features. For software that is already end of life, for machines that Linux Mint would run on for free. And there is one more thing about the ESU program that should make every privacy-minded user furious. To enroll in the consumer version, Microsoft requires you to sign into a Microsoft account. You are paying $30 to stay secure on a machine you already own, and Microsoft still makes you hand over your cloud identity to do it. That is not a coincidence. That is the model. Pay us, and then give us your account. Linux Mint's answer to all of this was simpler. Here it is. It is free. No account. No deadline. But this is the part where Linux Mint stops being a footnote and starts being the main story. Linux Mint 22.3, codenamed Xena, released on the 13th of January 2026. It is based on Ubuntu 24.04 LTS and carries security support until 2029. That means right now, today, you can install it on a machine Microsoft declared obsolete and receive 3 more years of security updates, at no cost, with no account, with no hardware requirements that would lock out a 2016 laptop. The minimum specs are 2 GB of RAM and 20 GB of storage. If you use the XFCE edition, one of 3 desktop environments it ships with, the system runs on as little as 512 megabytes of RAM. Windows 11's minimum is 4 GB of RAM. The machine Microsoft said was too old is running a modern, maintained, supported operating system. Same decade, different planet. The Cinnamon desktop, which is Linux Mint's default, was designed to look familiar. Taskbar at the bottom. Start menu in the corner. files where you expect them. It is not an accident that it resembles Windows. Linux Mint built its entire philosophy around making the transition as frictionless as possible for users coming off Windows. No massive interface relearning. No command line requirements to do basic tasks. It ships with Firefox, LibreOffice, a media player, and an image viewer. No junk app store pre-installed. No advertising apps waiting on the desktop. No AI assistant embedded in the right-click menu. No TPM. No secure boot. No Microsoft account. No Copilot. And yes, it still boots. That last point matters more than it sounds, because Microsoft spent a significant portion of 2025 making sure you could not avoid those things in Windows 11. In March 2025, Microsoft removed the bypass nro.cmd script, a command line tool that had allowed users to skip the Microsoft account requirement during Windows 11 setup and create a local account instead. Microsoft's stated reason was that the bypass inadvertently skipped critical setup screens, leaving devices incompletely configured. Users found new workarounds, registry edits, commands like mscxh, local only. Microsoft removed those too. By October 2025, in Insider Build 26220.6.772, Microsoft explicitly stated it was removing all known mechanisms for creating a local account during the out-of-box setup experience. The release notes said it outright. Users need internet and a Microsoft account to complete setup. The official local account path was gone. Every time users found a workaround, Microsoft played whack-a-mole and removed it. Bypass gone, registry hack patched, command blocked, account manager method closed. Microsoft was actively hunting down the escape routes. And every headline about a new removal was another advertisement for the alternatives. Think about what a forced Microsoft account actually means in practice. It is not just about signing in. When you set up Windows 11 with a Microsoft account on a new OEM device, BitLocker encryption keys are often automatically backed up to OneDrive. Your Drive encryption key, the thing that controls access to every file on your computer, leaves your device and lives on Microsoft servers without you being explicitly told. That is not a conspiracy theory. That is documented default behavior on many consumer Windows 11 machines. The forced account is not just about convenience. It is about cloud-tethered ownership of a device you paid for. Linux Mint handles this differently. Boot up, set a username and password. Done. No account, no sync, no prompts. Nothing going to the cloud unless you explicitly set it up yourself. Microsoft spent a year building walls to prevent exactly this experience. Linux Mint just never built the cage. And while Microsoft was constructing walls, it was also filling your desktop with things you did not ask for. By 2025, Copilot had been embedded into the Windows 11 right-click context menu, Paint, Notepad, the Widgets panel, Snipping tool, Edge, and the taskbar by default. Every interaction with a Copilot prompt, even dismissing it, was counted as an engagement in Microsoft's metrics. The company was measuring clicks on an AI assistant people were actively trying to avoid. Microsoft Force installed the Microsoft 365 Copilot app for all users with desktop Office applications installed, with no opt-out available for personal users outside the European Economic Area. That is not a feature rollout. That is an installation on your machine without your consent. Then came the bug. At some point, a Windows update accidentally uninstalled Copilot from some devices. Microsoft confirmed the issue and began working on a fix. Reddit users called it the accidental fix. PC Gamer described it as a rather pleasing bug. Users celebrated the removal of Microsoft's flagship AI feature the way you celebrate when a noise you could not turn off finally stops. That is not a user experience problem. That is a trust problem. When people cheer a bug that removes your product, you have already lost that audience. Microsoft's Windows VP publicly acknowledged in November 2025 that the company would reduce unnecessary Copilot entry points. That statement alone is an admission. If the entry points were unnecessary, why were they added? And then in April 2026, CEO Satya Nadella went further. On an investor call, he acknowledged that Microsoft is doing foundational work to win back fans across Windows, Edge, Bing, and Xbox. He cited aggressive default app behavior, erosion of trust through telemetry, and Copilot overreach as the specific problems. When the CEO uses the phrase win back fans in a public investor call, That is not the language of a company in control of the narrative. That is the language of a company that knows it pushed too hard. Linux Mint ships with no AI assistant, no Copilot equivalent, no embedded suggestions, no right-click prompt asking if you want to generate something. The closest thing is a search bar. Users who want AI tools can install them on their own terms. That design choice, trusting users to decide what they want, has become a competitive advantage by default. Microsoft made the absence of AI a selling point for its competitor without meaning to. And then there is the telemetry question, which is where the philosophy gap between these two operating systems becomes impossible to ignore. Someone ran Wireshark on a fresh Linux Mint 22 install. Wireshark is a network analysis tool that captures every packet of data leaving your machine. The result: no connections to analytics servers, no data sent to Canonical, no pings to Mint's developers, no connections to third-party trackers, nothing. The only network activity was functional update servers, package repositories, things the system needs to operate. Linux Mint does not send behavioral data by default. Its crash reporting tool requires you to manually run it and explicitly choose to upload anything. The default position is silence. Windows 11's diagnostic model is publicly documented, and that documentation is the problem. Microsoft divides telemetry into required and optional tiers. Optional telemetry can be reduced. Required telemetry cannot be fully disabled in consumer builds. It includes system information, application data, and usage patterns. It is tied to your Microsoft account identity. It runs, whether you want it to or not. Microsoft is not secretly stealing your data. The policy is in black and white on their support pages. But when users read those pages and understand what required actually means, some of them start looking for doors. For most home users, this might feel abstract. But for people in healthcare, education, legal environments, or any context where data compliance matters, an operating system that reports behavioral data by default without the option to turn it fully off is not a minor inconvenience. It is a disqualifying condition. Linux Mint meets the privacy bar those environments require, not because it was engineered for compliance, but because it was never built around the assumption that the operating system needed to know what you were doing. Now here is where the scale of this becomes bigger than just one operating system or one tool. StatCounter reported that Linux reached approximately 5% desktop market share in the United States as of June 2025. That is described as a record high. For context, Linux has spent most of the last decade below 3% in the US. The timing was not subtle. It coincided directly with the Windows 10 end-of-support period and the growing friction around Windows 11. Globally, Linux desktop share sits around 3 to 4%, while Windows still holds roughly 72% of the desktop market worldwide. This is not a collapse. This is a shift. A real, documented, measurable shift, driven by a policy decision Microsoft could have made differently. The migration wave had other indicators. Zorin OS 18, a Linux distribution designed specifically for users switching from Windows, launched to coincide with the 14th of October, 2025 end of support date. In 5 weeks, it reported approximately 1 million downloads. Zorin Group publicly stated that around 78% of those downloads came from Windows devices. Downloads are not the same as permanent switchers. Plenty of those were live USB trials, curiosity installs, people kicking the tires. That needs to be said clearly. But 1 million downloads in 5 weeks. The overwhelming majority from Windows machines, in the 5 weeks after Microsoft killed free Windows 10 updates. That is not noise. That is a signal. Forum traffic spiked. Tutorial views spiked. Reddit threads in R, Linux, and R, Linux Mint, filled with people asking the same basic questions. Can this run on my old laptop? Will my printer work? How hard is it really? The answer, increasingly, was easier than you think. 5%. In a market Microsoft has owned for 30 years, driven by a policy decision Microsoft made. That is the humiliation. Now, none of this means Linux Mint is for everyone, and saying otherwise would make this commentary worthless. So here is the honest part. If you rely on Microsoft Office for complex formatting, tracked changes, or collaboration in enterprise environments, LibreOffice handles most of it, but it is not identical, and it is not a perfect substitute. If you play games with kernel-level anti-cheat systems and some major titles use them, those games do not run on Linux. Proton and Wine have made Linux gaming dramatically more viable, and the Steam Deck proved that at scale, but compatibility is not universal, and you need to check your specific library before you make any decisions. If your workflow depends on Adobe software or other professional creative applications with no Linux equivalent, this is not your escape hatch. And if you have never installed an operating system before, the experience is manageable, but it is not zero effort. Backing up your data first is not optional, it is essential. But for the hundreds of millions of people who use a computer to browse the web, manage email, write documents, watch video, and listen to music, Linux Mint is not a compromise. It is just a different operating system that happens to be free, private, runs on hardware Microsoft told them to throw away, and asks absolutely nothing from them in return. IT professionals have already run the numbers. At $61 per device in year 1, $122 in year 2, and $244 in year 3 for Enterprise ESU cumulative. If you miss enrollment windows, Linux migration is not just ideologically appealing, it is financially defensible at scale. Community threads on Reddit and tech forums document organizations piloting Linux rollouts on non-critical machines after the October 2025 deadline. The conversation has moved from, "Should we consider this?" to, "How do we do this carefully?" Privacy advocates had pre-existing reasons to consider Linux. The EOL event gave them a mainstream moment where those reasons became legible to ordinary users who had never thought about telemetry before. Consumer advocacy groups, including PIRG, publicly urged Microsoft to extend Windows 10 support to prevent the waste of 240 million functional machines. Microsoft proceeded anyway. Linux Mint is not for everyone, but it is for more people than Microsoft would like. Here is the deeper meaning, and this is the part that goes beyond operating systems entirely. Linux Mint did not defeat Microsoft. Microsoft created the conditions for Linux Mint to win. The TPM wall, the forced Microsoft account, the methodical removal of local account bypasses, the Copilot flood across every application surface, the telemetry that cannot be fully switched off, the ESU paywall with a 1-year expiration for consumers, the 240 million machines left without a free upgrade path. Each of those was a Microsoft decision. Each one was a reason someone downloaded a Linux ISO instead of buying a new PC. Linux Mint did not arrive in 2025. It has been available since 2006. What changed is not Linux Mint. What changed is the cost of staying with Windows. The cost in money, ESU fees, hardware replacement cycles, Office subscriptions, the cost in privacy, telemetry tiers, forced accounts, cloud-synced encryption keys. The cost in control, Copilot embedded where you did not ask for it, bypasses removed as soon as users found them, set up paths that funnel every new Windows install toward Microsoft's ecosystem by design. When that total cost crossed a threshold that millions of ordinary users could actually feel, the alternative was already there. Waiting, free, running on the machine they were told to throw away. Satya Nadella says Microsoft is doing foundational work to win back fans. Maybe that is true. But the question worth sitting with is whether the fans he is trying to win back still have a Windows machine to return to, or whether they have already found that a PC running Linux Mint is everything they actually needed all along. The real question is not whether Linux Mint is as good as Windows. The real question is whether Microsoft made Windows bad enough that the answer stopped mattering.